I want to talk about a topic that people are just so afraid to talk about, and I think it should be discussed more. Um, First of all, before I say anything, I am not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. I'm not a CPA. I'm not an accountant, anything that stretches the imagination. I took some class. I do have a business degree, and I took some accounting in college, but I don't remember jack shit of it. So this is not financial advice. This is just my experience of things that I've encountered in my life. There's two stories I want to tell today. One is about 3 years ago, and one is actually recent. So, first of all, when it comes to taxes, it's kind of funny because it feels like people try to avoid the conversation. They try to avoid everything because it's so complicated. It's like impossible to learn everything. Like this, like the tax code, like a million pages long. It's ridiculous. That's why you hire a professional. That's just what I do. Again, not advice, but this is what I do. Because I learned from mistakes from years ago. So I'm going to start off with a story from a few years ago. I kind of have to back up a little bit. About 3 years ago or so, one random day, I get a letter in the mail from the IRS of California. Now, I live in Massachusetts, by the way, so I'm thinking, why the hell am I getting a letter from the IRS of California, of all places? Now, so a little backstory for that was back in the day, years ago, how it worked was if you sold on a platform like an Amazon and eBay, especially any of the big sites where you make enough to earn a 1099K, you sold enough to have you reported to the government and all that, you had to file your taxes. Okay, this is your federal taxes, but the state taxes were a little different. Again, this is years ago. This is like 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, whatever it was. Generally, the way it worked was, and again, I'm not a financial advisor, I'm not an accountant, but this is my experience of it. If you paid your federal taxes, but any state taxes depended on if you had a nexus in the state and if you had to pay them that way. So, again, legally speaking, if you make a sale somewhere, you're supposed to pay taxes to every state. That's just the legal way how it works. The way it worked, though, generally speaking, I think for a lot of people was if you had a nexus in a state, then you should file your state taxes with them. That's just how it was. So what is a nexus? A nexus basically means is if you have a business entity or inventory in a state that you are selling to. For example, I live in Massachusetts. So if I live in Massachusetts and all of my inventory is in Massachusetts, if I make a sale in Massachusetts, I have to pay state sales tax in Massachusetts. And so I have a nexus there. If I live in Massachusetts and my inventory is in Massachusetts and I make a sale to California, technically speaking, you don't have a nexus there as a tax term. And so, again, you should pay all your taxes, but you don't have a nexus there. Do with that information what you will. Anyways, the way it worked back then, it was especially, I used to be a huge Amazon FBA seller, which means is you buy a bunch of inventory, you'd send it to the Amazon warehouses, they would distribute it however they fit among their warehouses across the United States and the world. And then as it sold, they would pack it, they would ship it, and they would sell it and do all that. Now, the way it worked again back then was I made an account. I had an accountant somewhere in like Colorado. Basically, they handled state sales tax. So what they did was they opened up accounts for me all across the country in different states. And every quarter, I think it was every quarter, I would basically get a bill. They would file the taxes with the state that I owed them. Some states owe them like $20. Some states you owe them like $200. It depends on what it is and what your sales are. But the biggest states they always said was like your home state, California, Texas, Florida, I think like Pennsylvania or something like that. I forget what it was, but there were some of the bigger states that you owed the most money to. And so you had to file all these returns. You literally had to file every quarter. It was like a shitload of returns to all these different states for $50 there, $100 there for state sales tax. Never mind your federal sales tax. So that's kind of how it was back then. Then several years ago, I think basically what it was all the states were like, oh shit, we're missing out on all these sales for online websites. Because basically like online selling, online retail became huge over the past 10, 15 years, really. But all these sites like the Amazon FBAs, the eBays, people really started into them and making businesses out of them. So basically, I think what happened is all these states were like, hey, we're losing out on a lot of money here for taxes. So now it's easy because like the eBays, the Amazons, the TCG players, all these sites, they collect and remit the sales tax for you. So that's why no one has to worry about that anymore. So with that being said, it was about 5 years ago, right around when COVID hit, is when I said before how I was kind of letting my original reselling business, I kind of let it die and all that. I closed all my accounts. I told my accountant that did my my sales tax for all the states that I was, involved in and doing returns with. I said, hey, I'm shutting my business down. I said, just close them all down. Just give me a final bill and I'll pay them off and we're done. And he's like, sure, no problem. This is like literally like beginning of 2020, right around when COVID was happening. So I closed my business down. Like I said, for the next year and a half or so, I was just kind of chilling. I was relaxing. I wasn't really doing anything. One random day, I get a letter from the California IRS saying I owed them. I don't think it was a lot. I think it was like a few $100s. I'm throwing a random number. I don't know if this is right, but it was like $500 I owed them. Well, what they said is that I haven't filed my taxes in 3 years, and I'm thinking like, what the hell is going on here? Like, not paid them, hadn't filed my taxes with the state of California in 3 years. So I'm like, what the hell is this? So again, it's a hurdle. It's like a little challenge. It's like, oh, there's a problem here. You can't just throw a letter like that away. Like you have to address this. So I remember I came home from work, I got the mail, I saw this immediately. So I get on the phone, I call the state of California, the IRS, the number on the letter. And I was like, hey, this is the person you mailed a letter to. I'm like, what is going on here? Like what's happening? And the guy's like, yeah, he's like, we haven't gotten your filed your returns in 3 years. I was like, dude, I closed those accounts years ago. And he's like, oh, we didn't know that. And so I called my accountant who I haven't spoke to in like 3 years, 2, 3 years, whatever it was. And I was like, dude, like, what's going on, man? I got the state of California after me. Like, I need your help. And he's like, no, he's like, we filed those. I said, I know we did. I said, and I paid you. I remember I paid him and all that. And he looked into it and he called me right back. He said he figured out what it was. Is there was something wrong that year for whatever reason with the e-file, electronic filing. And so we just mailed him in. I go, okay. He goes, but that was right around COVID and they kicked everyone out of the offices. Everyone was working from home. So basically, long story short, kind of, is my taxes. I was like, where are my tax forms? He goes, they're probably sitting on someone's desk right now. They have been for 2 years. They haven't been touched. I was like, oh, great. So basically, I call the IRS guy back up and I was like, hey, here's what happened. And he kind of laughed a little bit. He goes, yeah, that's probably true. I said, all right. So what am I looking at here? And he goes, well, you owe us like whatever money it was in tax. I think it was like $500 I owed him for the taxes. He's like, plus, late fees, interest, fines. I was like, holy shit, I'm gonna owe like $1 million freaking dollars. This is gonna be crazy. I was like, all right, man, like hit me with it. What do I owe you? And it was like $650. It was like, so the tax, like the penalties, the fees, late fees, it was like $100, $150. It wasn't that big of a deal. And I was like, oh, I'm like, all right, cool. I'm like, well, dude, just tell me where to send the payment to. I go, let's just call it a day and move on with this. And he's like, well, it's not that easy. And I was like, all right, what do we do? And he said, well, he says, you have to file your taxes. You never filed them. He's like, so we have to go through the paperwork and file it. I'm like, dude, I'm not an accountant. I don't know what to do. He goes, no problem. He goes, this actually happens more often than you think. He's like, I'll walk you through it. So 3 hours on the phone with this guy. 3 hours on the phone. This is like after work. I was just like going to go home and chill. And all of a sudden, like your day gets thrown for a loop. But again, these aren't things you can walk away from. You have to deal with these kind of things. So I was like, all right, let's do it. So basically, how we had to do this was, again, say it was like $500, whatever it was, the taxes I owed to the state of California. He was like, all right, here's how we got to do this. We had to go on their website and fill the forms out. We had to fill it out, and we had to break down all my sales from the state of California down to the county. So then you have to figure out how much you had in each county, which he helped me with the information. I guess he could find the information. I forget the exact how it worked. But my original accountant sent me my forms back, so I had some information. Then the IRS guy had some information from his books. I forget how it worked. So we broke all the numbers down to the county, okay, which took a little bit of time. I forget how many counties it was. I mean, a shitload. And he goes, all right. He goes, now we have to break that down by city. So I had to take like I think it was a year or 2 years. I think it was a year of all my sales I'd done in like the state of California that year. Again, it wasn't much because I was kind of like ending my business. It was like a few $1,000s for the sales. It wasn't much, and we had to break down all those sales to each individual city, line by line by line. It was painful. It was like $16 to this city, $24 to this city, $4 to this city. It was ridiculous. But that's what we're doing. And he walked me through it. The guy was super cool. He was actually like, he was a pretty cool guy on the phone. We're like joking around and shit. And so we pretty much get to the end of it, right? And like accounting, it has to balance out. Like it has to equal on both sides. And we get to the very end, and we were like $1, like 50 off or something like that. And the IRS guy literally goes, close enough. I'm like, close enough? I go, this is the IRS telling me like, it's close enough. Like, it's fine. I'm like, okay, dude, like if you say so. And so this is again, like 3 years ago, we filed it. I paid him, closed all the accounts. He closed the accounts for me that were still open apparently. And then we moved on with our life, and that was it. So that was I like to tell that story to people because I think everyone is terrified of taxes. They're terrified of the IRS. They're terrified of all these problems. Like, I'm going to go to jail if I do something wrong. The reality is these are just people too. And I've told this story on my Whatnot channel, I think a couple of times, but like, it's important to know, like, these are people too. And they're people just like us. They make mistakes. They got to pay their taxes too. Like, they're understanding. It wasn't like I was trying to screw them over. I wasn't trying to do something purposely wrong. It was a mistake that actually my accountant, well, no one really made the mistake. It just, COVID happened, shit happened. So that was a learning example. And then at that point, again, I closed my business out. I was done. I was done. I was done reselling. I wasn't doing anything anymore. So it was kind of like, all right, put that behind me and move on with my life. So that was kind of my first story of like my run-in with taxes, let's just say. Again, no worries, no problems. The guy was super cool about it, whatever. Moving on to now, fast forward a few years to like literally right now. Now, this is again a situation that I think is important because it kind of goes back to the video I made last week, that my progress video, where I mentioned about like what happens when you have walls and you have to climb over them. What happens when you have troubles and you have to figure it out? What happens when you have a situation that you don't know how to work with, and so you've got to learn on the fly, like I did with the whole tax thing. All right, I'm learning this. I'm learning accounting on the fly. Here it is, and so the situation now, which is actually basically almost over. Uh, the change I made last year, I said, was like I hired a bookkeeper and I hired an accountant because I don't like doing that shit. It's boring as hell and I don't want to deal with it. And so going through the year, what do? You set aside money for taxes. You pay your quarterly taxes, you set aside more money for taxes. You can estimate the best you can based on what you're doing. So that's what I did all year long. I made a plan and everything was good. I was ready to go. However, I was wrong. I was very wrong. When I was sitting with my accountant, we talked about it. We talked about, okay, here's what your tax liability is, and here's what you owe. And the number they threw at me was not what I expected. It was a lot more than I expected that I owed. And I said, I literally started laughing out loud. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, what does that mean? And so she's kind of laughing with me, and she goes, and we're talking about it, and we plenty of deductions we found with the business and everything, and making everything work, but I still owed like a lot of money, and I'm laughing, I'm literally laughing through it because I mean, what else are you gonna do? Like curl up in a ball and cry? Like you have a problem here, you got to deal with it. And so she, at one point, she literally looks at me. She's like, "You are taking this really well." I said, "Well, what does it mean when you pay taxes? It means you made a profit, and that's what it is." And I think that's where people get kind of lost with the whole conversation with taxes. Now, this whole video wasn't a conversation of like how you do your taxes because I don't know how to do that. That's why I said at the beginning I'm not a financial advisor. This is my story of situations where I've dealt with them. So she kind of looked at me and laughed. She's like, I'm glad you're taking this well. I said, well, to be perfectly honest with you, it's a good problem to have. I said, it's an unexpected problem. It's a hole I'm going to have to dig myself out of a little bit. I said, but it's fine. I said, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I said, it's just, here's a problem. I'm gonna have to kind of like set myself a goal and plan it out and figure out how I'm gonna work through it, and eventually it'll go away. I go, that's what happens with problems. I said, but you have to attack them and work with them. Back like years ago when I was when I talked about like how I got into reselling in the first place was like the personal debt and all that, and like you have this mound of shit to deal with. Excuse me. You have this mound of shit to deal with. And you can't just walk away from it. Like you have a problem, you have to deal with it. And so I told her, I said, listen, I said, let's come up with a plan. Let's figure it out and we'll make it happen. So we worked a plan together. We said, great, let's figure this. So now there's a plan. It's set in place. We're good to go. It's actually almost all set anyways. Like not too long after. So it was just a matter of like the surprise of having to do it. And it's funny because I've had people like in my Whatnot show, we talk about business sometimes. We talk about all sorts of things. I love having a conversation about anything in my show, like whatever cool topic we want to talk about, everyone's down for. And we've talked about business before. We've talked about taxes and all that. And there's so many times where people like, will say like, oh, I'm so nervous about my taxes and all this. You shouldn't be. There's no reason to be nervous about it. If you're doing any kind of a business throughout the year, again, this is not financial advice. This is what I do. Again, just in my experience, if you're doing any kind of business throughout the year, I don't care if you sold $1,000 in singles for the year, you should be setting aside, again, I set aside what I plan to owe in taxes, and usually you're pretty close. You know what I mean? Usually you're pretty. Maybe you're overstated a little bit. Okay, you get a little bonus for yourself that you don't have to pay over. Maybe you're a little under. Okay, well you got to add up to it in the end. But again, my situation this year, I was off a lot. You know what I mean? There's a few things I didn't take into account, and I was a lot off. But again, it's one of those things where I said, it's a good problem to have. Now this year I can plan for it a little bit better and I can make improvements on what I'm doing. It's just a mistake. Um, it's just a speed bump. You can't look at a situation like that, especially something like taxes, and just ignore it and be like, well, I'm not going to deal with that, or I'm going to do something shady. No, you do the proper thing and deal with it, and you learn from it and you move forward. So many times, you know, I like to buy products from a lot of different areas. I do a lot of on eBay, I do Amazon, Facebook Marketplace, people selling their collections, things like that. I love, anywhere I can find a good deal to put on my show, I'll buy the products. And I can't tell you how many people, and this is, I get the world we live in, but I can't tell how many people where they want a payment a certain way that doesn't have any protection. And my answer is no. Absolutely not. I will pay you the extra 3% fee or whatever it is. And so many times the seller is like, nope, not doing it. And they will blatantly say, I'm trying to avoid paying taxes. I guess if that's one of you, if that's the way you want to do it, sure, that's you. I mean, you do you, that's fine. Um, but I think that where I see people are looking at the wrong way is you're limiting yourself. Remember, if you're paying taxes, it's because you made a profit. It means you made money, and yes, some of that's got to go to the government. That's just the way it works. That's the system we live in. Whether you agree where that money's going or not, that's a whole different story. But if you're going to play the game, that's the way the rules are right now, anyways. Um, but I think that people should not be afraid of paying that money out. That's okay. I mean, as long it's again, that's part of doing business. You know that going into it, so it shouldn't be a surprise. So as long as you plan for it, you should be fine moving forward. But I think that a lot of people that have a lot of potential and talent of selling or whatever are limiting themselves because they don't want to like go full on with it. They don't want to like open your business, like start the LLC, get your accountant, and move forward. And for me personally, like once I did all that and I knew that that stuff was covered. Again, this year there was a speed bump for sure, but it's not a big deal. It was just different than what I thought it was. It opened my eyes to the potential of what you can do when you stop worrying so much about these things that you really don't have to worry about. And you can outsource certain things of your business, of your hobby, or whatever it is, if you really want to. But you have to take the chance and try it. For me, like once I got the bookkeeper and the accountant, it was like open a whole new world for me because I wasn't worried about it anymore. I knew a professional was taking care of it and all that. End of the day, the error that happened this year was my interpretation of the numbers is what it was, which is really funny, which is really stupid on my part because honestly, I'm really good with numbers. I just made a mistake on interpreting what they gave me, and I should have asked questions. I didn't, and I made an assumption. My bad. So it's not their fault. It was mine. 100% my fault. But I think that again, don't limit yourself because you fear something. And I feel like the tax thing is just the three-letter word tax is such a four-letter word that everyone avoids. Like if you ask somebody about like, how do you do this? Like no one wants to talk about it. It's crazy. I don't understand it because like, granted, none of us are like CPAs or accountants, but like, I think it's important to like share some experiences like that we've had. And I think that my experience, like dealing with, I said, I've dealt with the IRS before of California, simple mistake. And it's not a big deal. The problem, not even a problem, that the situation I had this year, it's not even that big of a deal. But when you fear those things that haven't even happened yet, that doesn't make sense. I get it, but like that's just not the way my mind works. My mind works is like, all right, well, like we have a problem, we have to deal with it. So if you're in a situation where you're afraid of owing a bunch of money in taxes, if you're afraid of it, guess what? It's probably because you're making a lot of money, you're doing a good job, so you're worried about it. What I do is I put some aside and you save it for paying the taxes and you're good. Again, I know this is kind of one of those weird topics where it's I have to be careful too what I say because again, I've already said I'm not a financial advisor, but I don't want to say you should because just speak to a professional. You know what I mean? But I was working. I was at my job a few years back. This was funny. This is about two and a half years ago. And this is actually what gave me the idea. I was like, I need to, like, get the accountant and all that. I work at a retail store, and I randomly started talking to this customer on the sales floor. He needed some help, and like for some reason we started getting a conversation. We talked for like 30 minutes. He started talking about taxes. Turns out he was actually a tax a collector and auditor. I forget one of the other ones. And I started picking his brain because I was, in the business, I deal with that kind of thing. And I really picked this guy's brain. And it was really enlightening to talk to somebody that was on the front lines like he was. Again, he was the kind of guy that would go to you and like, hey, we need to collect this or whatever. I think that's what he dealt with. Or I forget the exact was, but I really picked his brain about it. And he would tell me, but like, certain things to do, certain things that not to do, certain things to look out for, certain things to be wary of, and he was even telling me, he's like, I get audited every year. He goes, every year I get audited by the federal government. I was like, really? Like, why? And he's like, well, he had this weird, I think it's part of like retirement or something like that. I forget the exact details, but where it was like a weird payment to him every year. And so when he filed it, it was like a red flag so every year this guy got audited. And he's like, it's not a big deal. He's like, these are good people. They're not trying to throw you in jail. I think that's the biggest fear of everybody is like getting in trouble. Like, oh, you forgot to pay him $1 and they're going to throw you in jail. That's not the way it works. If you're an honest person trying to do the right thing, legitimately trying to do the right thing, and you make a mistake, you make a mistake. You fix it, you move on. I mean, it's as simple as that. Like, again, they're people just like us, doing a job just like us. And he was even saying is like that it's the people that are deliberately trying to do something criminal and deliberately trying to fool somebody that the ones that get in trouble. So just don't, be honest. Like the way I run my business, everything is up on the up and up. I would never even like try to do something like even mildly shaky. So I don't know. This was on my mind and I wanted to share this. So let me know your thoughts. Again, it's one of those topics that people don't talk about. Again, these are my experiences. Again, sensitive topic. I get it, but I don't know. Try not to be afraid of things before you really understand the situation, and reach out for help if you need it. If there's a topic you're not familiar with, don't go learn on YouTube. You don't go learn on some website. Talk to a professional, especially if you really want to move forward and do something different.